Hi. In this video, I'm going to be talking about something that happened in Bill Nye's show, Bill Nye Saves the World, Season 1, Episode 2. And what happened is Prashant Venkat, who's a writer and kind of a minor character on the show, got up on stage to discuss cultural appropriation. So in this video, I'm going to be addressing Prashant's speech and describing what I think the problems with Prashant's take on cultural appropriation are. So cultural appropriation refers to taking an idea, an invention, a creation, art, etc., from a culture that's not your own and using it for your own ends. So when Prashant gets up to give his speech on cultural appropriation, he's got two topics. First, he talks briefly about alternative medicine, how that's not real or effective. I've got no problem with this. I agree with him. Alternative medicine is usually a scam. But Prashant tries to connect alternative medicine in a way that I think is very forced. He tries to connect alternative medicine to his second and main topic, which is cultural appropriation, as I've mentioned. So Prashant describes cultural appropriation as being stupid, and we can hear him describe it that way in this clip.
I'm gonna come out and say it. White people, I love you, but stop using Asian wallpaper for street cred. I see what you're doing, and it's stupid.
Okay, so Prashant calls cultural appropriation stupid. In the context of what Prashant is talking about, he's saying using Asian culture as wallpaper. By this he means using Eastern religious iconography in order to evoke a kind of mystic or religious or spiritual atmosphere in a shop where you might, for example, sell alternative medicines. But presumably, and I think we can presume this based on the content of the rest of Prashant's speech, presumably Prashant is against cultural appropriation in other contexts as well, and we'll see that a bit later on. So contrary to what Prashant says here, I see what you're doing and it's stupid. Cultural appropriation isn't stupid. It's smart. It's actually a really good thing. Isaac Newton said, "If I've seen far, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants." And what he means by this is you can do great things by building on great work that has already been done before you. This is another way of saying, don't reinvent the wheel. Take what other people have already built, build on it yourselves, and let other people build on your innovations as well. And this is applicable not only to great luminaries like Isaac Newton, not only to master artists, etc., but this is applicable to everyone in their day-to-day lives. You should be encouraged. You should definitely feel free. You should be encouraged to look at other cultures and see what they have to offer. Not only is it fun in its own right to explore different cultures, but you can find things that are meaningful or valuable to you, and you can incorporate them into your own life. And this could be television shows or music, it could be hairstyles or clothes, languages, etc. You can enrich yourselves and others by learning from different cultures. And that's actually one of the benefits of having a diverse set of cultures, is that we can learn from these different ideas and experiences, and we can all get richer thereby. Let's hear a bit more from Prashant.
And it's not entirely your fault, white people, which is why I want to say something to my fellow Asians. Asians, lend me your ears. Stop convincing white people it is real. This is as much on you as it is on them. You know how gullible they are. You know they just want to fit in.
So here Prashant comes across to me as being obnoxious and condescending. He acts like he's some arbiter, judge, assigning blame. It's not just white people's fault, it's Asians' fault as well. So that comes across to me as kind of needlessly antagonistic. But Prashant is also being very hypocritical here. He's talking about the evils of cultural appropriation. We hear his line, Asians, lend me your ears. Lend me your ears, Asian people, Prashant says. Well, that line sounds a lot like a line from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, which goes, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. So how is it that Prashant can be comfortable decrying the evils of cultural appropriation while simultaneously he is a serial cultural appropriator himself. We see, his suit. Suits come from the sartorial tradition of King Charles II, an English king. He's a character on a TV show that was inspired by an American television show, Bill Nye the Science Guy. Prashant is distributing his content through Netflix, which has a website on the World Wide Web, which was invented by an Englishman, Tim Berners-Lee. So Prashant is speaking English. Prashant is appropriating all these elements of other people's culture, of the English culture, for his own profit. And he's, just taking these elements of other people's culture, and then he's telling you not to do the same thing. So I completely disagree with Prashant. In fact, sharing ideas with other cultures, taking ideas from other people, will just make for better outcomes. Generally. Prashant is an exception. So you aren't a genius just because your great-grandfather was. Prashant acts like he has some special claim, or that he gets some special right to say who can and can't use Buddha statues, for example. Really, there's no reason why Prashant should feel this way. So I had nothing to do with the creation of Buddha. I wasn't there. I didn't help anybody when Buddha's ideas were being written down or collated. I didn't contribute anything to that. I didn't make the original statue. I know this will be surprising to my audience, but I have no copyright over Buddha. But all of these things are true of Prashant as well. So it is absurd for Prashant to be telling people based on their skin color who can or can't use this idea that he had nothing to do with. Just because people who are genetically similar to you came up with Buddha, or were Buddha, I'm not entirely sure, that doesn't mean you get any kind of right. You don't, my father invented something. That doesn't mean I can claim his invention. Or my great-great-great-grandfather invented something. That doesn't make me a genius. Like I mentioned before, Prashant is taking all these ideas from English culture. He's referencing Shakespeare, he's speaking in English, he's using the internet, etc., etc. It would be absurd and inappropriate for me to say, Prashant, you can't speak English, okay? English is my culture. Prashant, you can't go on the internet. That's my culture. Prashant, you can't reference Shakespeare. That's my culture. It would be absurd for me to say that. It is as absurd for Prashant to say, oh, you can't use Eastern religious iconography in your stores. It's simply absurd. So the perfect example of cultural appropriation making things better comes from Prashant's own speech when he says, Asians, lend me your ear. He's referencing Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was, of course, a real historical figure. He was written about by a guy named Plutarch, who wrote a book about the lives of different figures in antiquity. So Plutarch was a Greek man who became a Roman citizen. So Plutarch starts this chain of cultural appropriation by taking Roman history and using it to write his book. And Shakespeare reads Plutarch, and he continues the chain of cultural appropriation in order to write his play. And so millions of people in innumerable languages all around the world have read Shakespeare's play, Julius Caesar. And it's just making people's lives better to get these great works of art and read them, like Shakespeare, like Plutarch. To get these great works of art and literature and read them. It's making things better, and it's based on cultural appropriation. And then we see that the chain of cultural appropriation, takes a kind of misstep as Prashant appropriates Shakespeare to say something dumb, essentially, on the internet. But still, the overarching point is that cultural appropriation is a good generative thing, producing these marvels like Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, like Plutarch's lives. So yeah, let's hear one last word from Prashant.
Doing Reiki to cure cancer, or South Asians marrying people based on astrology. They see truth and they want to copy us. And that's when it gets really dangerous. But more importantly, that's when it gets really tacky. I mean, look what they've done to yoga. Yoga was badass. Yoga is actually good for you, but white people got their Lululemon hands on it and turned it into the smooth jazz of the fitness.
So when Prashant says they, he's of course referring to white people. They've made yoga bad, or they've turned it into smooth jazz, et cetera, et cetera. Prashant is kind of deeply confused here, it seems to me. When white people started doing yoga, that didn't make anybody worse off. Indian people are still as free as they ever were to do yoga. What happened when white people started doing yoga is that white people became healthier. They got a better life, a better experience, etc. So, you know, again, this is just an example of cultural appropriation doing good things. White people, you know, get yoga. Indians get things like the internet, the English language, the various cultural products of Western culture. So exchanging cultures is not only fair, but it's also purely beneficial. The flame of a candle may light 1,000 fires, but that flame is not diminished. That is, you don't lose anything by telling people your idea and letting them build on it and letting them grow with it. So cultural appropriation, just really a great thing, a pure benefit. Prashant tries to connect it to jazz in a way where I think he's alluding to a kind of historic example of cultural appropriation from the previous century, where Black musicians were prevented from capitalizing on their own musical innovations, particularly in the area of jazz, and white musicians took credit and were able to profit by kind of following in the footsteps of Black pioneers. But that analogy or that comparison between yoga and jazz is quite flawed. Like I mentioned, the reason that Black musicians were taken advantage of or exploited is because there was a system of legal and social oppression that prevented them from capitalizing on their own innovation. And the same is not at all true of Indian yoga instructors in the US. So nothing is lost by allowing white people to do yoga. Prashant may think that, oh, it's kind of lame, like, oh, yoga's lame now that white people are doing it. But to me, that just seems like a dumb and racist kind of charge. Like, oh, it's lame that white people are doing it. You know, he says they put their Lululemon hands on it. Lululemon refers to a type of clothes that women typically wear to do things like yoga. So, you know, it's just a kind of bizarre complaint coming from Prashant. And as I mentioned before, it seems condescending, like Prashant is somehow better or cooler than you know, these lame white women who are out there doing yoga. I think it's a bad complaint in the midst of a bad series of complaints by Prashant about cultural appropriation. So there may be some criticism over what I've had to say, and I've tried to anticipate some of the major points, and I'll try to respond to what I anticipate the criticism will be. So first off, I can see people saying that I've mischaracterized what cultural appropriation is. So I've described it as taking ideas, creation, art, etc., from a culture that's not your own and using it to your own ends. But people might say, well, cultural appropriation is more than that. It's about using other cultures without attribution for your own profit. So if you want to take that definition, the first thing I'd point out is that it still applies equally as well to Prashant. You know, Prashant didn't say, lend me your ears, Asian people, thanks Shakespeare. He didn't say like, oh, English, you know, this came from, you know, Prashant didn't give the disclaimer that I am not a native speaker of English, or that I am, you know, not the inventor of the English language. Maybe he is a native speaker of English, I don't know. but he didn't invent the language. He didn't say, I didn't invent the internet. I didn't blah, 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 blah. The point I'm trying to get at is you take so many different ideas from so many different cultures all the time that attributing them is a kind of foolish bar to hold. So you shouldn't expect attribution, and nor is it even clear why attribution would be meaningful. I don't think anybody thought that Prashant invented the internet or invented the English language. I don't think anybody thinks when they happen across a Buddha statue in an incense store that that store created the statue. Oh, did you guys come up with Buddha? I never knew. People don't think that. So it's not clear to me why attribution is even important at all. But if you think this kind of somewhat alternate definition of cultural appropriation is the right one to use, I'd point out that the harm here is using ideas without attribution. The harm here is infringing on intellectual property. And the harm is not taking ideas from different cultures. So if you want to say that it's bad to use ideas without attribution, you actually don't need to, and in fact shouldn't say, it's bad to take ideas from other cultures without attribution, because it's equally as bad to take ideas from within your own culture without attribution. So leave the culture part out of it. Taking ideas without attribution is bad. Adding in culture doesn't change the equation at all. Second criticism I can imagine people might have is that they could say, well, cultural appropriation can only happen to marginalized groups. So it couldn't happen to English people, like I referenced before, because English people are not a marginalized group. They aren't oppressed by society. There aren't laws in place oppressing them, etc. And again, if you want to use this definition, I think it's fine. I think it doesn't change the core of what I've had to say so far, actually. In reference to this idea that cultural appropriation only happens when you're taking the culture of oppressed groups and using it for your own profit, the problem here is not taking things from other groups. The problem is that there are structural or systemic, social or legal oppressions of this marginalized group. So, to refer back to the example of jazz, there were social and legal systems in place that prevented Black musicians from fully capitalizing on their musical innovations. And that was the bad part. That was the harm. The harm was not white musicians following in the footsteps of Black musicians. That's, again, a purely good, productive, generative thing. So if you want to say cultural appropriation only happens to marginalized groups, sure, you can define the term that way, but the problem is not taking ideas from other cultures. The problem is the oppression, the marginalization of that group. So the third and final criticism that I've tried to anticipate is that Prashant is a poor advocate for this idea of cultural appropriation being a bad thing. So if I wanted to be really intellectually honest and rigorous, I would look for the best advocate for the harm of cultural oppression. I'd look for the best advocate giving their best work, and I'd try to address that and refute that. Because Prashant is not the best advocate, because he's giving a 2-minute speech, he's trying to be funny at the same time. It's not really fair for me to try to rebut the entire idea of cultural appropriation based on Prashant's speech here. And I think in response to that, I'd say, that's true. But the reason why I've chosen to focus on Prashant and not, say, the best advocate for cultural appropriation is because my concern here is not with the idea of cultural appropriation in particular. My concern is more with Prashant and Bill Nye's show, because I think it seems to me that Bill Nye's show is using science as a background or a setting in order to promote these social ideas that I think are dubious in some cases. And I think Prashant here is advocating things that are actually pernicious. He's suggesting that you don't take ideas from other cultures. that white people are lame for having co-opted yoga, etc. I think Prashant is saying things that are wrong, that are harmful. And even though he's not the best advocate or even a very good advocate for the harm of cultural appropriation, he's still saying something that's wrong and he should be rebutted. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button. If you're interested in subscribing, the content I have coming up, I'll talk more about Bill Nye. I'll try to persuade you of the thesis that I articulated in the previous slide, where I suggested that Bill Nye is using science as a setting to promote a certain social agenda. So in the next coming videos, I'll dig a bit more into that idea. Then after that, I'll produce a video on some research I've done into the immigration problems in Sweden. And specifically, I've done some reading of government and academic literature and really looked at some government statistics to come up with a thesis that I think is defensible regarding the problem of immigration in Sweden. And then I also have some thoughts on the US healthcare system, which I'll present in a video format and kind of sketch out some ideas as to why healthcare in the United States is unusually expensive. So yeah, that'll be the content coming up. If you're interested in it, then please subscribe.